Figuurlandersgroep Australia, Bulletin number 29 at September 2022, o.figure.org.
Finding security and direction.
I love meditation because it increases my cognition of reality, and with that comes an increased sense of direction, increased certainty, and increased appreciation and love of everything. I am aware that as our world is increasingly plagued by the various predicted troubles, not the least being COVID virus and the conflict flaring up between Russia and the West, people around me are becoming more anxious and troubled and are not sure what to do. Of course, I also feel stressed and troubled to see things getting further out of hand everywhere, but fortunately there is a way to stay balanced and optimistic and with a sense of direction even through this, whereby of course a true understanding of the term optimistic is necessary. I include the definition as given in Might of the Thoughts chapter 16p.
In fact, that which is meant is that kind of optimistic behavior which enables a human being to see and acknowledge the clear truth, and, even in the rottenest situation, to realistically observe and consider the very worst, and nonetheless recognize the best, and direct his or her striving at that, in order to allow the good and evolutive things to become reality, and in order also for him or her to make them real himself or herself.
So, as I understand it, optimism is not about denying the troubles and strife in the world, but, based on a true acknowledgement of the reality, good and bad, optimizing the goodness, always optimizing the potential for evolutive, constructive change. So meditation strengthens one's healthy optimism. However, simply describing the benefits of pure observation, which is practice in meditation as taught by Billy Edward Albert Meyer, is only good for potentially getting someone interested in trying it and giving an idea of what to expect. Then the individual simply has to make the personal effort to experience the effect for themselves, which goes beyond words. However, I can describe in words why it is that I need to work much harder on this. I was out on my property as usual the other morning, hoeing weeds and contemplating the interdependency of things: the nuts, the dog which chases away the parrots which eat the nuts that feed us, and the ducks which dislocate the mushrooms and make fertilizer for the nuts, and so on and so forth. When my projects seem to be moving along painfully slowly, or perhaps in the wrong direction, I am forced to try to reevaluate to make sure I am still on the right track. So much energy goes into all of it, and I wrestle with myself to test the value and the logic of it all in the context of the need to have a backup money-earning plan, among other things. My thoughts go round and round and round. I work it all out in my head like a big equation, trying to make sure that my plan is not some sort of pie-in-the-sky detached from reality. Again and again I run all those thoughts around and around my head intellectually, scrutinizing each part over and over again and looking to see if I have misvalued anything. Round and round I go, and, although somewhat satisfying if my equation finally seems to come out right, it actually usually ends up making my head hurt, and then I have to admit that I am still left with an irritating, worrying doubt about everything, because none of that intellectual thinking is certain, and it never can take all the potential environmental, economic, and social problems of the world into account, and it can't grasp the implications of my own might of thoughts. Nor can it take into account the rest of the nature of the non-material reality and the characteristics of all existence, which Billy explains one can access through the clear view of meditation. On p. 250 of Introduction to Meditation, in the section, Freeing of the Consciousness, it says the following.
The pure observation is the direct access to the cognition of the reality and its truth, which brings the final clear view to the human being, and precisely herein lies the main value of the meditation and the highest of all forms of its function that frees the material consciousness. The clear view is the direct and deep-reaching insight into the characteristics of all existence, namely into its passingness, enduring of Leiden, and egolessness and substancelessness. The clear view, however, does not just exist in a conceptual abstract cognizance of these truths or in the purely intellectual recognition of them, which remains non-binding for one's personal life attitude, but it is rather a more empirical knowledge of the truth, which is acquired by means of the repeated, clearly and distinctly observing confrontation with one's own physical and psychical processes. Therefore, it belongs to the efficacious knowledge that transforms the human being.
It's no wonder then that intellectual thinking alone is tiring and unsatisfactory. Burdened by that intellectual weariness, eventually I remember that I need to listen to my innermost self in regard to my projects, and that it is the consciousness working in both the spiritual and material that bears fruit and provides certainty. The spiritual consciousness, that is, the consciousness which listens to the innermost spiritual self, tells me facts with confidence and without hesitation. I only need to pay attention. And then I need to integrate this process and all that is learned from it into my daily thought processes. In light of the thoughts in which Billy addresses the relevant thought processes and application of this inner listening in great detail, we read the following in chapter 34 p. 388.
Therefore, the more the human being learns to pay attention to his or her innermost nature and to listen to it, the more the ability is developed to contemplate everything and to integrate it into his or her inner nature as well as into his or her actual life, whereby the impulses of his or her innermost nature have an increasingly lasting effect, and the innate wisdom of the creational nature can be conveyed into the inner nature which one must form.
Despite my aforementioned realization and all my investment in studying spiritual teaching, a few days after the previously described intellectualizing about the interrelatedness of the ducks, mushrooms, dog, and so on, I caught myself doing exactly the same material-only approach in the context of listing priorities. So, in order to now work out which of the chosen projects should be first priority, I took my brain on yet another excursion through my tangle of thoughts to try to work it out. I went round and round and round again with a trail of apparent logic there, only to become exhausted again and unsatisfied and unconvinced, despite having what might conventionally be seen as a good or even very good plan. So I reminded myself again that I needed to look at it all with my spiritual consciousness, which can see beyond time and space and take inspiration from the storage banks and so forth. Interestingly, it told me a quite different order of priority than the one my rational consciousness told me. What this seemed to mean was not that I would not attend to the things that were previously first on my list, but that they would be tended as secondary zeal to make possible the ultimate spiritual zeal which I had put last on my list as some sort of luxury that I could indulge in when everything else was done. How wrong that was, considering the supremacy of the spiritual reality. I had forgotten in two significant examples that the inner self of the human being, when it takes direction from the innermost spiritual self, successfully directs the agenda. I caught myself stuck in the material view of life, as I said, despite all my supposed commitment to the spiritual teaching. In Canon 49 of OM, also repeated in large part in Contact 11, Samiase teaches the following.
In the uncreational thinking human being, the material intellect, with all its given restrictions, takes the highestmost place, and through this has to result a monstrously slow development of the spirit and the consciousness. The spiritual intellect must be quite consciously developed through the consciousness, because it is not sufficient to think that it moves in higher forms of its own volition. The material intellect of the human being may only move in a perfect circle of possibilities. Always it remains stuck on the surface of the objects and may not impress into them and become one with them, because without a complete identity with the object, the knowledge of it is absolutely impossible. The material intellect takes on the testimony of the material mind and the resulting deduced logical conclusions, but rejects the deepest subjective inspiration. Deep-rounded cognition reveals to the human being the understanding that yet something more is in him/her than that which is transmitted by his or her usual consciousness, something that is the origin of all thoughts, fine spiritual perceptions and feelings, of fire consciousness and spiritual presence, that always leaves him or her unsatisfied with bare material striving.
Until we make meditation concentration a habit and also the integration of all that comes from it, we also deny ourselves all the knowledge that is stored from our previous lives in the storage banks that comes out of our spirit form's previous lives. Samyasa continues.
But for this it is required that he or she fight his or her own low intelligentum and acknowledge that the material intellect constitutes no human being if it does not also, in the same measure, work together with the spiritual intellect. If that happens, and the human being recognizes his or her spirit, the entire abundance of knowledge, wisdom, ability, freedom, love and peace collected in earlier lives comes about again and extensively benefits him or her.
It really is foolishness. I have seen the evidence before of the superior perspective and influence of the spiritual on the material existence, and yet irrationally I fall back again and again into the habit of acting as if it is not the case. Here is a good reason to create new habits and work specifically to integrate the knowledge we gain into our daily lives so it can all finally make sense, and so that we and those around us can benefit from that profound spiritual wealth. As Samyase says in Canon 49, line 60.
The human being only gets to know his or her spirit through meditation, through conscious inner contemplation, through the deepest sinking into the stillest chambers of the consciousness and of the spiritual self, and by looking directly in the reflection of the inner and innermost life. The advice could not be clearer. What are we waiting for?
Vivian Leigh. Time has to be used, the word of the teaching of Nicodemus and the word of the teaching of the truth, teaching of the creation energy, teaching of life.
Whether the life of the human being and its time is short or long, flexible and very extensive, he or she has to be encouraged on his or her own accord to use it rightly, rationally and responsibly. No matter how short or long his or her life may be, he or she always has enough time, indeed more than enough time, to shape his or her mode of life positively, rightly and righteously according to the creation and natural laws and recommendations. This is possible for him or her because he or she determines how and what he or she wants to be and what his or her needs, dreams and wishes and fulfillments are. However, he/she has to learn and understand what the flow of time is, and he or she has to use this cleverly, rightly, rationally and responsibly. In doing so, he or she has to go through time relaxedly, just as he or she also has to claim his or her right to determine his or her own rhythm in every and any actions, deeds and behaviors, and to make his or her way through life at his or her own speed. He/she has to use time for his or her consciousness-based evolution in order to bring forth love, knowledge and wisdom for himself or herself. And he or she has to control time in this form so that it does not control him or her. Therefore, time must not dominate him or her, rather he or she has to work with it as a flexible tool which he or she puts into place, applies and uses according to his or her own free will, and does this in a form which he or she can enjoy. Time is in a certain sense a journey through life through which uncountable, important and valuable things can be explored and done in every conceivable form. The human being only has to invite himself/herself to rightly use time as a journey of discovery, as in the sense of a scientific expedition. In this form, he/she simply has to be accompanied by the reality and its truth, scrutinizing everything and anything and necessarily experimenting with many capabilities and possibilities existing in him or her, as well as many kinds of things, in order to use the outcomes gained for himself/herself in a valuable and progressive form. Thus, time has to be used rightly in order to lead everything to great things and successes which make life valuable. And when time is used as a journey through life consciously and in a form which is exploring as well as recognizing, experiencing and living experiencing, then the consciousness forms and brings forth love, knowledge, wisdom, peace, freedom and harmony, out of which also happiness, feelings for others and fairness come. Using time as a journey through life is based on an ancient, wise tradition which calls upon the human being to use time sovereignly according to the creation and natural laws and recommendations. This is done in order to be himself or herself in every respect far away from an unreal belief in an imaginary Godhead, as religions and sects use them in order to make human beings dependent upon them, to enslave them and exploit and abuse them work-wise, financially, and also in some cases sexually. Throughout all of time, the truth calls upon the human being to face up to the reality and the truth, perceive them, recognize them, and live according to them by using time for learning, not however in order to simply accept everything superficially and forget it again, because only what is consciously and clearly perceived, recognized, understood, and logically followed as reality and truth ultimately proves to be true knowledge and forms as essence to wisdom. Very early on, the universal prophet Nicodemus proclaimed the word of the early teaching of the truth, teaching of the creation energy, teaching of life, wherethrough, with this beginning, the truth was given. As a result, the power of the word emerged in relation to the creational natural laws and recommendations which have been taught for around 9,000 million years. And since the beginning of this unique teaching, its words have permeated the entire universe, and they have a sound for those searching for the truth, which offers them a safe harbor. The teaching of Nicodemus is also a special language which leads to a stairway to a higher consciousness if one experiments with it in the realm of reality and truth in a form which is searching, perceiving, recognizing, understanding, and implementing. And effectively, the truth arising from this alone can lead to the cognition of that which is really true. This and the firm, sometimes harsh, however very safe sound of the word of truth may well surprise or even displease some human beings. However, the truth cannot always be told with fine words, and much less with flattering words, and it can never be bent according to desire and mood. The reality and truth do not teach begging prayers, and also not help from an imaginary Godhead of religions and sects. Rather, they require the freedom of the human being and the human being's own will, as well as his or her absolute individuality in every respect, and also the absolute independence from a higher might, because in every respect he/she alone is his or her own Lord and Master. Thus, when he or she is all alone and specifically addresses himself/herself, then he or she does not say submissive prayers as a sinful fallen nature who begs dog-like and servilely for salvation, help, and blessing. Rather, he or she trustfully addresses himself or herself and knows that only he or she can help himself or herself, because he or she alone has might over himself or herself and is his or her own Lord and Master over himself or herself. This fact is also claimed by the birthright of the human being, and it also acknowledges and expands the creational natural power which actually exists in him or her and makes him or her independent from all beliefs and from irrational teachings regarding an imaginary God and higher mighty ones of the same kind. The word of the teaching of the truth, teaching of the creation energy, teaching of life is very mightful, because it is a word of renewal and of union with the creational natural laws and recommendations, which are not absent and not dead, because they exist also in the material world of the human being and in the entire universe, where they are ever present. What the human being lacks is only his or her consciousness in relation to them, as well as the conscious contact with them in order to perceive, to recognize, to understand, and logically follow them, and this is what the word is about in relation to the teaching of Nicodemus. This teaching clears the way for the human being so that he or she can form his or her life in freedom, peace, love, and in being glad and happy, as well as in harmony, and lead it in honor and dignity in a comprehensively righteous form. This is only to be understood and comprehended by the human being, and when he or she really works at doing this, and he or she musters enormous energy and power on his or her own behalf, then he or she has to apply this amply for himself or herself. But if he or she uses only a part of his or her energy and powers, then the rest lies completely idle and useless. Consequently, therefore, in every respect, it is necessary to always apply all that which is available in terms of energy and power. Only when that which is best and entire is given can a real success arise and the determination which is set be achieved. If this wisdom is acted upon, then a revolution is triggered in the human being as a result through which confidence and certainty are created. However, all of this means that the human being has to take a profound and conscious interest in his or her existence and life because he or she is a participant in existence and life itself. Therefore, it is recommended to him or her to form and to pronounce the positive word in himself or herself which opens the door to himself or herself and to his or her right life conduct, through which he or she then enters and works with the power of the positive word and forms everything into that which is the best and good. And if one acts in this form, then it quickly becomes apparent that the whole thing is not simply animating and strengthening, rather effectively healing in regard to the whole negative life-forming process and life conduct.
Samia Silver Star Center, 16th October 2013, 1622 Billy. Truthfully life.
Many a human being is afraid of his or her own thoughts and feelings because he or she is not really living his or her life, and therefore he or she is searching for the true truth of the real and truthfully life.
Samia Silver Star Center, 16th October 2013, 1623 Billy. How long is a piece of string, or how long does it take to get a reasonable understanding of the teaching?
Sometimes, when we have a conversation with a friend or acquaintance, we cannot take everything in and process it right there and then, so sometimes snippets come back sometime down the track, for example, whilst doing housework or weeding the garden. The following is one example of those moments. While speaking with a friend who I met through FLAU about 16 years ago, this friend expressed their amazement at my progress in terms of understanding the spiritual teaching. It came out of the blue and I wasn't prepared for it and didn't really know how to respond. And as it happens sometimes, the flow of the conversation is such that one does not get a chance to say, "Hang on a minute, what makes you say that?" So since then I have been wondering why they had said that, just to give me a compliment, or was that person genuinely surprised that someone can have a decent understanding of the teaching after only 16 years when they had studied the teaching for about 40 years? Just to make one thing clear, I am by no means a shining light when it comes to understanding and practicing the teaching of the creation energy. All of us are in the school of life, and we have a vast number of subjects to study and practice, for example, love, compassion, harmony, peace, equalistness, patience, thoroughness, preciseness, and so on and so forth. And just like it is with all subjects at school, in the school of life, one student may be at the top of the class when it comes to compassion, but then this very same student may struggle with patience, and thus sits at the bottom of the class when it comes to that subject. So I think this friend may have thought of one particular thing that I do reasonably well, but I know there are quite a few subjects in which I need some tutoring and much more practice, so there is no reason for me to feel any more advanced than my fellow human beings. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and there is no need to elevate one person or put them on a pedestal because they seem to have a great understanding of the teaching, because they too have areas that require improvement. However, if that person does a particular thing well, one can use this as an inspiration and try improving in that particular area as well. It does not matter for how long a person has studied the teaching, whether it is 40 years or 15 years, the decisive factor is how the teaching is applied and whatever life experience a person may have. Goblet of the Truth, Chapter 22.
You human beings, you are part of the universe with its immutable, eternal laws and recommendations of the creation, in which a purpose for existence is also determined for you, the sense of life which is given in the relatively highest possible evolution of the consciousness. When I discovered the FLAU and Billy in 2005, it felt like I had come home, that I had finally found what I had been looking for all my life. I recognized the purpose of my existence and the sense of my life, and since then I have given up meaningless hobbies in order to have time to study and lead my consciousness to the relatively highest possible evolution. My seal is to become the Lord and Master over myself, as it is written here. And if you recognize this life purpose and life sense and bring it into relationship with your own existence at every hour, every day, and at all times, then you will unavoidably recognize yourselves and be Lord and Master over yourselves. And if you are Lord and Master of yourselves, then you will be able to arrange your surroundings in a favorable wise through your knowledge and your wisdom, in order to do things that are right, of fairness and of progress, as well as of the evolution of the consciousness.
In Billy's book, The Way to Life, the 7 steps of the education are listed, and if we follow those, we will eventually get to the point where it will be a continual joy for us to learn the things of life that will further our evolution and help us to become knowing and wise. And how long it will take cannot be answered, just as little as the question, how long is a piece of string? Perseverance and tireless effort are required, and the success depends on it, not on a certain time spent with it.
The 7 steps of the education.
The happenings of the world depend on the thoughts. 1. As the first step, the human being must search for and find the truth, and out of that, learn and widen the knowledge. 2. As the second step, the human being must correct his or her thoughts using control and direct them to the truth of his or her attained knowledge. 3. As the third step, the human being must create his or her inner harmony by means of his or her knowledge and by means of his or her thoughts. 4. As the fourth step, the human being must, proceeding out of his or her inner harmony, correct, order, form, and harmonize his or her own personality. 5. As the fifth step, the human being must correct, order, form and harmonize his or her direct surroundings and his or her family life and life with his or her relatives. 6. As the sixth step, the human being must correct, order, form and harmonize his or her closer environment of the friends, comrades and acquaintances. 7. As the seventh step, the human being is then capable of correcting, ordering, forming, harmonizing and leading a group of human beings, the mass of humanity, the country and the world in a form which is wise, which is fair to the human being and which is creational, natural, law-based.
So to me it is no big deal that I am making an effort to follow the inner urge and striving to become a better person, and I found the compliment from the friend unfounded. In my eyes, everyone ought to strive and follow the teaching after coming across it and recognizing the purpose of life, namely to work on one's own evolution, thereby supporting the FLAU mission and spreading the truth anew is also part of the task. Some people have had the privilege to be told by Billy what their role has been in a previous lifetime with regard to the mission, and what they had promised some thousands of years ago with regard to their self-determined task, which they would carry out at the time when the proclaimer of the new age spreads the teaching again. To me that is not important. The most important thing is to listen to one's calling and make the most of the opportunities in this life, because no matter how wonderful or not one may have been in the past, at the present time the decisive factors for one's evolution are the thoughts, words and deeds in the here and now. They determine whether one stagnates or keeps moving along on the evolutionary path. At the end of the day, I often reflect on this advice from the book, The Way to Life.
A true human being assesses himself or herself daily according to at least 3 questions and answers, which are: have I expanded my knowledge sufficiently today? Have I sufficiently corrected, ordered, formed and harmonized my personality today? Have I done the right thing with all human beings with whom I came into contact? Those questions are very helpful when it comes to assessing the progress one has made. I am very grateful that I have access to Billy's vast teaching and that I can pick the brains of some FLAU members who seem to live the teaching and seem to be on top of the class in some areas. When they are able to answer my questions to an issue that I can't figure out even after due consideration, I can expand my knowledge. As it is with all of us, my creation energy form still has millions of years of evolution ahead of it, and there is no reason to get proud or conceited because of a compliment with regard to one's progress.
There are many factors with regard to understanding the teaching, and one could be age. In Contact Report 418, Plijedis Pliharnischi Contaktbericht, Block 10, page 411, PETA states,
As is unfortunately common with many young human beings, they believe themselves to be misunderstood by the older semesters and think that they themselves, as young ones, are more mature and forward-thinking than the older ones who have already lived many years longer and have had many experiences and lived through them. Many young human beings as a whole lack the necessary perception, recognition, and cognizance of the facts and their reality, as well as the necessary knowledge and the experience resulting from it and the necessary living of the experience. Consequently, the necessary essence of the whole, namely wisdom, is also lacking. Life experience, however, as well as its lived experience, is of enormous importance, because only through it does the valuable wisdom of life emerge. And only when this is present can intellect and rationality really be used in a valuable form, and thus progress and appropriate development can also be achieved.
Therefore, if a person discovers the teaching at an advanced age, they could have the advantage of life experience, and thus it may be easier for them to understand parts of the teaching, whereas a person at a young age may not have the lived experience to fully understand the teaching and thus need a little longer to fully comprehend it and put it into practice. As Billy has explained in many books and texts, it is important to not just understand the teaching intellectually but to experience it by living it. And again, the time it takes depends on the individual, their circumstances, life experience and so on, and cannot be measured, just like a piece of string.
Vega Walder.
I was once blinded, wandered about and fell, but turned towards the truth. Now I recognize my Ziel. I know now where I stand, now I know who I am. Therefore, whatever happens to me, it is always my gain. My burdens I will carry, no matter how heavy each is for me, and I will never be faint-hearted, and never do anything with cunning. I recognize the concatenation of destiny and of fault, but I also see the rescue and the grace rising from it. Knowledge will release me from error, from hardship and suffering. Therefore, I renounce all that is evil and I am ready for eternity.
Quill/Sourcemeyer, BN 1979/1994, Lebanon Tad Fiju, Simea Say Silver Star Center, 8495 Stmidruti, Shwe. Page 12.